All right, so good morning. Today's daf we'll finish Ayin Bet, and then we will turn to Ayin Gimel as well. So now that we're starting a few minutes late, we'll go a little bit past. Hopefully, we'll still be able to finish it a little bit after 7:30, 8:30, excuse me. But we should be okay. All right. So on Wednesday, we learned the Mishnah on Daf Ayin Bet Amud Aleph that says that if one conditions the effectiveness of a get on death, so then it's as if one did not say anything. So we had again in our Mishnah Zeki Tech Imiti. If this is your get if I die, Zeki Tech Micholize. This is your get if essentially if I die from this illness. Zeki Tech La'achar Misa. This is the get after death. So in all of those cases, lo amar klum. That's what our Mishnah said. So now we're going to focus on one of those. Zegi techni meiti lo amar klum. We're at the two dots, about 18 lines up from the bottom of Ayin Bet Amud Aleph. So Zegi techni meiti lo amar klum. If this is your get, if I die and I haven't said anything. So Amar Rav Huna b'choletzes. But Rav Huna said, even though the person hasn't said anything, and therefore there's no reason to think that that if God forbid the husband then dies without children, that there's a reason that she should not be able to do yibum with the surviving brother. But we say, Rav Huna says, there's a little too much of a concern here that maybe it was a good get, and so as a result, she should do chalitza and she should not marry. One second, v'hamar lo amar klum katani. But we said in our Mishnah that that the guy hasn't done anything. So if he hasn't done anything, it's not a get. So then it suggests that they should be able to do yibum. So lo amar klum de asira la alma. No, it's not. He hasn't said anything because she's still forbidden to marry other people. Right? So she's not allowed to marry other people, but she's still prohibited to marry the yibum, to do yibum. So one second, Muhammad the Sefer Choletzes. Well, one second, we had later on in our Mishnah the case of if you say mihayom achar misa, from today and after death, we said get ve'enu get ve'imeiv choletzes v'lo yimisyabemis. We specifically have another case where we reference yibum. So miklal dereisha yibumi nami miyabma. That implies that in the reisha there was an ability to do yibum, because if there was no ability to do yibum, we should have said that you have to do chalitza. So it can't be that Rav Huna is consistent with our Mishnah. So masnisin karabanan. Actually, that's right. Our Mishnah is like the rabbis. The Rav Huna to Amar Rabbi Yossi, and Rav Huna disagrees with the rabbis and agrees with Rabbi Yossi. So he has a different Tana that he is effectively paskening like. To Amar Zmano Shel Shtar Mochiach Alav, because Rabbi Yossi has the following concept that if you have the date of a contract on something, that shows the intention of the date that you're trying to set this up. So the get has a date on it. And so even though you said, with my death, so the point is that notwithstanding the fact that you said that, we're going to understand your intention as effectively like what we'll see later on, like we see later on in the situation of mihayom ula'achar misa. That just like mehayom la'achar misa, we treat as if it's an uncertain situation and you have to do chalitza, you can't do yibum. So too, if you have the date of the document on the document, which is true for every get, and you say imeti, if I die, so it's as if you have. It's as if you have two conflicting aspects, and we're going to treat that as a case of uncertainty. Well, one second, Rabbi Yossi chalitza nami lo tibai. Well, one second, if in fact you follow the date, why should we care at all about the fact that you said imeti? Let's just follow the date. It should be a totally valid get. So v'chitema misapkale Rav Huna, and if you say that Rav Huna was unsure, hilchasa Rabbi Yossi, ein halacha Rabbi Yossi. If you want to say that maybe that this is just reflecting an uncertainty about that Rav Huna has with respect to whether we follow Rabbi Yossi, we have a story that will say that will show that could it really be that Rav Huna was unsure? Of course not, because we have the following story. V'harabba bar Ravua chalash. Rabbi bar Avua was not feeling well. Ug legabe Rav Huna v'Rav Nachman. So Rav Huna and Rav Nachman went to visit him to help him feel better. So we're telling a story, Mark and Lori, about Rabbi bar Avua, who wasn't feeling well, and Rav Huna and Rav Nachman went to visit him. So Amrle, Rav Huna, Rav Nachman. So before they go in to visit him, so they say, Rav Huna says to Rav Nachman, listen, boy, mi name Rabbi bar Avua, halacha Rabbi Yossi oein halacha. Go ask when we are there. Let's ask him some Torah questions, and we'll ask him whether the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi in this situation of whether we say Zmanu shel shtar mochiach alav. So Amar Lei, so Rav Nachman said, one second, time of the Rabbi Yossi lo yadana. I don't know the reason of Rabbi Yossi. Halacha ibaymine. How can I ask him if the halacha is like that? So meaning, if I don't understand something, if I don't understand the fundamentals of something, how can I ask the question? This is an important principle that we need to understand the fundamentals in order to really be able to ask great questions. So Amar Lei ad boy. So and how do I understand? So I understand by asking. So he's essentially asking Rav Huna, how you teach me? So Amar Lei ad boy minei halacha. You ask him the halacha of the time of the Rabbi Yossi ana aminolach, and then when we have a moment, I will tell you the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi. So by minei, so Rabbi bar Avua asks Amar Lei hachi amarav halacha Rabbi Yossi. So Rabbi bar Avua, who was not feeling well, was able to do a little bit of Torah and said to him that in fact Rav had taught that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. So Lebasar Denafak, after they left, Amar Lei, Rav Huna explained to Rav Nachman, Hainu time of the Rabbi Yossi. This is the reasoning of Rabbi Yossi. To kasavar zmanu shel shtar mochiach alav. Now the point is that why is it that Rabbi Yossi says that if somebody gives a get that has the date on it, and the person says imeti, we still treat it as a valid get? The reason that we treat it as a valid get is because the date of the document shows that in fact that is that's the intended date on it. So so it can't be that he's unsure about whether the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. So Ela Misapka Amar Rabbi Yossi Bal Peh Ilo Amar. So the question is 1 second. If in fact, actually, so the halacha that he was asking was about a simple case, meaning we haven't said anything about any kind of date as to when it takes effect, and Rabbi Yossi says that it takes effect based on the date that's in the document. So the question is and maybe it says in the document imeti. That must be the situation, right? So yes. So as a result, in the document it says imeti and it has the date on it. So as a result, we say that the date shows that that's the intended date for the effective.
Just remind me, the date on there is the date that obviously counts, but isn't it the date that it's handed to the divorce?
Yes, so it must be the date that is written as for that date. So be handed, exactly.
In front of witnesses.
Correct, in front of witnesses. And there's even the opinion that says that those witnesses are the most important witnesses because they're the ones who make the get effective. So what's the question? So the question is Iyam Rabbi Yossi Bal Peh Ilo Amar. So the question is, as Rashi explains it, is that if in fact, right, Rav Huna was uncertain whether Rabbi Yossi's position applied even when someone makes an oral statement, as opposed to where the condition and the date were both in the document. So if they're both in the document, it's clear that Rabbi Yossi would say, follow the date. Don't follow the words if I die, or at least to the extent that if I die is in there, it's meant as a condition, not as an effective time. And so as a result, the uncertainty is if in fact, in addition to having the date on the document itself, I make an oral statement that seems to contradict the date. And so Rabbi Yossi would say, so what Rav Huna was uncertain about is would Rabbi Yossi say, even in that situation, we apply Rabbi Yossi's principle of the date in the document determines the facts. So now the question is, the Gemara now asks, did Rav Huna really have a doubt about whether in the situation where an oral statement contradicts or appears to potentially contradict the date in the document, that we will just follow the date in the document. V'hatnan, we have a Mishnah that seems to make that clear. Harei zeh gitech, this is your get, the husband tells the wife. Im lo bati mekan va'ad shnei masar chodesh, if I don't return within 12 months. Umeis b'soch shnei masar chodesh, and he dies within those 12 months. Now, did his oral statement mean that it was effective at the end of the 12 months, or did it have an immediate effectiveness? So the Tanna Kama says, "Aino get." It's not a valid get because the Tanna Kama understands that the oral statement is an indication of when it should take effect. Namely, it should take effect after 12 months. The Tani Allah, and it was learned in a brisa about this, Rabosenu hitirua lehina say, the rabbis permitted her to marry. And the Amrina and Man Rabosenu, who are the rabbis that permitted her to remarry, meaning that it was a good get, if the husband died, meaning without performing chalitza. So Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Beidina Desharo Mishka. It's the court that that permitted the use of olive oil for from non-Jews, because just as we are prohibited to have wine of non-Jews and in many situations bread of non-Jews, so as a result they had also dictated that we could not have olive oil of non-Jews, but that got to be too much. And so a later court said, you know what, we're going to allow the usage of olive oil of non-Jews. They allow the usage of olive oil. And so that court was the one that said, V'savri like Rabbi Yossi, and that court held like Rabbi Yossi, to Amr's Zmanu shel shtar mochiach alav, that we follow the date of the document. And so as a result, here's a case where there was an oral statement, because the person says, if I do not come back within 12 months, and an oral statement that suggested a later time, whereas the written date is on the document. And we say that if in fact the facts, the condition comes true, Rabbi Yossi says we follow the date on the document. So Elam Asapkale, so what was Rav Huna uncertain about? E halacha ka Rabbi Yossi bal peh, o ein halacha. The uncertainty that Rav Huna had was not about whether the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. It was not about whether Rabbi Yossi would apply his halacha in an oral statement, but the halacha was, is the halacha like Rabbi Yossi in a situation where there's an oral statement, meaning combining the two things? Because yes, we have that story about Rav Huna and Rav Nachman going to ask the question, but here but that question was only about where the document has the contradiction inside itself. So the date on the document and the statement of if I do not come back or if I die is both in the document, and that's where we'll assume that the date on the document is what determines. So, but Umi Masapka, so again we ask the question, was really Rav Huna uncertain about even that situation? V'ha'amar Rava harei zegitech imeti v'sha'ani made harei zeget. That if, because we have a situation where Rava said, and Rava is an Amora and is only going to say something if it's the halacha, and he says this is your get if I die, and this or if this is your get in the case that I die. In each of those cases, harei zeh get, it is a valid get. But when I die, ulachar misa, or after I die, ain zeh get, then it's not a valid get, because again, you can't have a get take effect after death, and the last two statements suggest after death, but are clear statements of after death. But the first two statements seem to suggest that we would follow the date in the document instead of the language of the persons used. So therefore, we're seeing that even that there is no doubt that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi. Well, hey, Kidami, the Gemara points out the following. Well, first of all, maybe we're talking about where the person said mehayom, and this is the rabbis. So tzricha lamemar. No, you can't say that, because then that would be obvious. V'hatanan mehayomi meiti harei zeh get. So we already have the case of from today if I die, that's a valid get. We already know that, so that can't be what Rav is talking about. The Elalav, the Lo Amar Lo Me'ayom. So it must be that Rava was talking about where he didn't reference today, the Rabbi Yossi, and therefore it must be that Rava is reflecting Rabbi Yossi. So Shema Mina Halacha ka Rabbi Yossi. So doesn't this show that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi? No. So it does show that as the Gemara's answer is a pretty obvious answer. Le Rava pshitale. It was obvious to Rava that the halacha was like Rabbi Yossi in this case, in the case of an oral statement that contradicts the written date in the document. But the Rav Huna masabkale. But it was still uncertain for Rav Huna. Okay, the e-bias, so that's one possible answer. The e-bias olam the amr lam. Or you could actually say that really he did say that it was from today. And Rava is not in fact saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, but rather he's emphasizing that the halacha is like the rabbis, the Rabbanan, and his ruling is reflecting of the rabbis. So in that case, well, why did he even need to say it? And it was the additional language that he said. Because what did he add? He added visha animes, and so that's new language. The sha'ani mace, that's a situation. Ke'imeti dami, v'kisha amut kala achar misa dami. That there are two additional languages, new languages that Rava teaches that he had not taught before, and so as a result, he's teaching that sha'ani mace is like imeti, and kisha amut is like la'achar misa, and so as a result, that's what he's teaching us. It's not so there is a chiddush in his statement, and so we don't have to actually say that he's holding like Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so that was one whole line of teaching of understanding Rav Huna. That Rav Huna was saying that that you have to perform chalitza in this situation, and we had this whole question of of whether or not how does it contradict? Doesn't that contradict with our Mishnah? Now we're going to say, because remember we began Rav Huna's original statement, we didn't know it was Rabbi Yossi, so we had to ask him that Rabbi Yossi. We didn't know it was Rabbi Yossi, and so as a result, we had to ask about Rav Huna from our Mishnah, because it seemed like he contradicted our Mishnah. But now we're going to teach it as if it was taught originally that it was Rabbi Yossi. There are people who said that Rav Huna's statement was about the end of the Mishnah. That this is your get after death. He didn't say anything. And Amar Rav Huna, Rabbi Yossi that when in the situation of Achar Misa. So it's not the situation of Imeti, but rather it's the situation of Achar Misa. And those are two different languages. And in our Mishnah itself, we said that if you say Mihayom Ula Achar Misa, it was a case of uncertainty. And so as a result, when you have the date on the document and an oral statement of La'achar Misa, well, then if Rabbi Yossi says you follow the date on the document, then he would exactly say that that's a situation of conflicting language where we end up with a case of uncertainty. So again, there's two potential languages that we use. One is imeti, that we're going to say, depending on the context, will determine its meaning. But la'achar meti, but if you say after my death, well, that's very clear. And so there is no uncertainty about the meaning. And so as a result, when you have two statements that clearly contradict, there's no way to reread the way we reread for imeti. There's no way to reread la'achar misa. And so as a result, if you say that have the date of the get on the get, and then you say la'achar misa, so then Rabbi Yossi will say, just like if you were to say mihayom la'achar misa, we're going to tell you that it means we're in uncertain waters and she has to perform chalitza. So too, if you have the date on the document and you say la'achar misa, Rabbi Yossi would say you have to do chalitza. So Pita, that's obvious. What you just said, what I just understood, is totally clear from from our Mishnah. From the end of the Mishnah, it's clear that the rabbis would say chalitza, that you have to do chalitza in the case of mehayom la'achar misa. So reishanami l'Rebbe Yossi chaletzes. So similarly, when you have the date on the document and you say la'achar misa, it also should be according to Rebbe Yossi a situation of chalitza. So no, it's not so obvious, because Ma'udetema, what might I have thought? Rebbe Yossi, Bahaka Rebbe Svirolite, that Rebbe Yossi actually holds like Rebbe. Now, who's Rebbe and where do we understand him? So we're going to get to that, but we'll get to what that means. The Amar, because what does he say? The Amar Gittin Ma'al Yahavi, because in a discussion that we'll have in a moment, he's going to tell us that this get is actually a good get. That meaning that when you say this is your get from today and after death, that in fact the Rebbe will say that that's a valid get. And so I might have thought the Rebbe Yossi would hold like Rebbe, the chalitza nami lo tiboy, and therefore you wouldn't even need chalitza. So kamash malan. So that's why it's important for Rav Huna to teach to lo Rebbe savar la Rebbe Yossi, that Rebbe doesn't think like Rebbe Yossi, below Rebbe savar la Rebbe Yossi, Savar Laka Rebbe, and Rebbe Yossi doesn't think like Rebbe. So what are these statements? Where's the statement of Rebbe? Rebbe lo Savar Laka Rebbe Yossi. So again, we're going to now just give you a little more of a hint, but really not get into the details. The Gemara is going to explain what we're about to say. Rebbe lo Savar Laka Rebbe Yossi de Katani Kazek get. Because Rebbe says in a case like this, it's a valid get. Again, we're going to see exactly what that means in a moment. Rebbe Yossi, which implies that Rebbe Yossi disagrees. The Rebbe Yossi lo savar like a Rebbe, and we know that Rebbe Yossi doesn't hold like Rebbe because again, the Gittin kazeh get, because we're going to see that Rebbe Yossi is going to use that same language of that this is a get. And the Rebbe, and the fact that it's only Rebbe Yossi who says it, we're going to see that it means that it's not Rebbe that says it either. So let's take a look. What in the world are we talking about? Rebbe Mai. What is the statement of Rebbe where he uses kazeh get? To Tanya, because we have a brisa mahayom la'achar misa, that if you say today and after death, get be'eno get. That is which is again that matches up with our Mishnah. It's a case of uncertainty. Divrei Chachamim. That's what the Chachamim say, and that's what our Mishnah says. Rebbe Omer kazeh get, but Rebbe says no. If you say from today and after death, it is a valid get. We'll focus on just the today. Rabbi Yossi Maihi, and what about Rabbi Yossi? Where does he use that same language of kazeh get? Did not, because we have a Mishnah. This Mishnah is at the end of the Masechet on I guess it's a few pages from now, few days from now. It's on Ayin Vav Amud Bet, and the Mishnah says, Kisu utnu get leishti, go write a get and give it to my wife. Im lo vati mekan ad shnei masar chodesh, if I don't come back within 12 months. So ksavuhu b'soch shnei masar chodesh, they wrote it within the 12 months. Unisanu la'achar shnei masar chodesh, but they waited until after 12 months to actually give the get. So Eino get, the Tanakama says that that's not a good get, because the implication is that I only want you to go ahead and give the get and write the get only if I don't come back. That's the way the Tanakama understands it. But Rabbi Yossi says no, kazeh get. Rabbi Yossi says it is a valid get. And because according to Rabbi Yossi, listen to the language, right? The language was write a get and give it to my wife if I don't come back within 12 months. So the question is the phraseology of if I don't come back within 12 months, does it go both back on the write a get and give it to my wife, or does it go on just the second of those? Because that's where it's proximate. So as a result, maybe it's write a get, period, and then give it to my wife if I don't come back within 12 months. And Rabbi Yossi said that's a reasonable interpretation of what was said, and we can understand him to mean it. But the Tanakama says no. If I don't come back within 12 months, applies to everything. Now, Rabbi Yossi would agree, according to Rashi, that if you wanted to make sure that the get was only written after the 12 months, well, then you should put the conditional clause at the beginning of the sentence. And if you were to say, if I don't come back within 12 months, write a get and give it to my wife, then Rabbi Yossi would even agree that in that situation, of course, you can't write the get, because you can't write the get until after the 12 months have expired. So as a result, we end up seeing there are two different languages two different versions of Rav Huna. Rav Huna is again basically agreeing with Rabbi Yossi and saying that in the case of imeti, because there's a document, there's a date on the document, or in the case of la'achar mita, in the second case, because there's a date on the document, we're going to treat that as a case of uncertain situation. All right. So now our Mishnah next said that if this is a get, if I die from this illness, and then we said that the person got up and he went to the marketplace, and so as a result, it seems like he's not sick, and so the implication is that it's not going to be a valid get. So Amar Rav Huna Gito Kamatanato, that we saw this principle before. Rav Huna says that a gift and a get are similar. That when you give a get, if you're on your when you give a gift, if you're on your deathbed, if one then gets better, so then the gift is conditional on death, because the setting is so obvious that was your intention, and so as a result, if the person gets better, we're going to say that it goes back. Similarly, if a person gives a get in that situation, we'll say that it goes back. Umagito av al gav delo parish, and so kavan to amar ksovo av al gav delo amar tenu. Oh, I'm sorry. So avgito iman amar. So again, sorry. So principle number one is that if just as a gift, if done on the deathbed is considered conditional, so too a get, if done on the deathbed, is considered conditional. And second, umagito avagat lo parish kevan de amr ksobo avagat lo amr tnu. We're going to say it's a valid get, that even though you did not specifically tell the person to give the get, you only told them to write the get. We're going to understand that given your situation, that the person's situation, that they're on their deathbed. So of course, we're going to say that that's a valid get, because the intention was clearly that the get should be given. So we're going to, so too, afmatanato, so too with a gift. Kavan to amar tenu, once you say that you should give it, so avagav de lo kanumine, even though there was no formal act of acquisition, no more formal kinyan, we're going to say that it's a valid gift. Okay, so now we're going to ask a question from our Mishnah, because we're going to see that our Mishnah might actually contradict what Rav Huna said, because Tanan Zegi take me this is your get if I die from this illness, and then we say that the person got up and then he goes to the marketplace and then he got sick again and he died. We say that we assess him, we determine we're going to determine whether or not he's a valid get, but whether or not he died from the first sickness. But Rav Huna doesn't mention anything of that. Rav Huna seems to say, as long as you get better from the first illness, you're totally fine. So v'i amrat im amad choser. But if you say, like Rav Huna says, that as soon as he gets better, it's as if the get is retracted. Lama li umdana. Why do I even need any assessment? Hare amad. He got up and he went to the marketplace. Well, Amar Marbre the Rav Yosef Mishnei the Rabba. So answer number one of this, which is going to have an obvious response. Shanitik mecholi lecholi. Nah, he got better from the first sickness, but he stayed sick. And so he went to another sickness. Well, one second, it says he specifically got better. No, it doesn't mean he got better completely. It means he got better from one sickness and then went to the other sickness. But we have in our Mishnah that he actually went to the marketplace, so that can be. No, halach al mishanto. So we're going to say he got God bless you. He got much better. He got mostly better, but he was not completely better. He still needed a cane. He still needed a walking stick. And so as a result, as we turn to Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, we say v'hakamashmon. And this is what we're teaching us. So we have essentially three different possibilities. One, the halach al mishanto, if in fact he gets better enough that he can go to the marketplace, but he still needs a crutch. That's a situation where we're going to say that you need to have an assessment to see whether or not he is, whether or not the first illness is what caused him. But idach, in the other case, meaning if in fact he stayed sick and stayed in bed, even if he went from one sickness to another one, umdinam nami lo be'inan, we don't even require an assessment. And really, idach could be both cases. If the guy gets better enough that you don't even have that he doesn't even need a crutch, he doesn't even need a cane, well then he got better, and so he obviously would not, it would not be a valid get. And if he was stayed sick and he went from one sickness to another, so we'll say that it is a valid get. Shema mina. So doesn't this show? Matana. After all, Rav Huna says that a gift and a debt are treated similarly. So doesn't this show that if somebody who's on their deathbed gives a gift, but then goes from one sickness to another, he never gets fully better, but he goes from one sickness to another, that his gift is a valid gift. After all, we treat a gift just like a matana. I mean, a gift just like a get. And just like in the get, we just said that if you go from one sickness to another sickness, the get will still be valid. So the Gemara answers in yes. In fact, it isn't a good gift. That if in fact somebody is on their deathbed and they give a gift in that situation, even if they get better from sickness number one, but they go straight into sickness number two, so they're never able to go up and out to the marketplace, well, then in that case, we're going to say that the gift was intended to be effective, because the point of the gift was not about the individual sickness, but about the fact that the person was on their deathbed. So Rabba v'Rava lo svira lahu ha de Rav Huna. But Rabba and Rava don't agree with Rav Huna that if a person gives a get, a person who's sick gives a get, that the get is, will be nullified if they get better. Because because we're worried that we're going to say, well, one second, maybe people will think that the only thing that matters is death, and that people will think that the get is only valid after death. Because let's focus on the situation. John is on his deathbed, and he goes and he says to his wife Jane, look, I'm going to give you this get. And he does not specify, hold on, I just want to make sure I get this right. Right. He does not specify the nature of his get, right? It's just, we see that he's on his deathbed. And so as a result, he gives the get to his wife, Jane, and according to Rav Huna, we understand from the context that his get is intended to be only conditioned on his death. But what Rabba and Rava say is, one second, what is it going to look like to everybody in the world? That if, in fact, he gets better, there's no get. And if, in fact, he dies, there is a get. Well, everybody's going to look at this situation. Remember, he didn't say, if I die. If he said, if I die, that's a different situation. But here, it's just the setting that is that allows Rav Huna to say that if the person dies, that the get should be valid, and if the person gets better, the get is retracted. But Rabba and Rava say he didn't say anything, so it's going to look like to all the world like what is happening here is just that upon his death the get is valid, and so we can't allow that to happen. So that's the concern that they have, and so as a result, we're going to say it is a valid get. Right? So one second, could it be that the Torah would tell us that something is not a valid get? So as a result, this man and woman, John and Jane, are really supposed to be married from the Torah. And yet the rabbis are going to tell us that, in fact, Jane is allowed to go marry somebody else, even though the Torah tells us that she can't. How can that be? So the Gemara answers, yes, in fact, that is the case, because kol the Mekadesh adait the Rabbanan Mekadesh. Anybody who gets married ever is getting married based on the understanding of the rabbis. And the rabbis have the ability to uproot the entire marriage and say, and break the original marriage. So Amrle Ravina Ravashi, and we've seen this a couple of times whenever we see this discussion of the ability of the rabbis to break a marriage. So Ravina asked this question to Ravashi, Tainach the Kaddish Bakas, but that makes sense if you get married with money, because presumably there's the concept of hefker based in hefker, so we can effectively take away your money. As if it's not yours, the base didn't. And so as a result, he hasn't actually given her money to get married. So they shouldn't be married. Well, because the Bevia, but if they got married through marital relations, how in the world could they undo that? So so no, they can undo it because essentially they'll say that marital relations is not for the purpose of marriage, but rather is just a situation of a non-marital marital relation, non-marital relations, and is a case of promiscuity and nothing more. All right. So that is that situation. And so, in fact, we see that Rabba and Rabba disagree with Rahuna, and we have these two different viewpoints. Okay. So let's just. And it does seem based that the Rambam seems to paskin like this the latter statement, like Rabba and Rabba, and not like Rahuna. But okay, Tana Rabbanan. So now we have the Gemara quotes a brisa that addresses what happens if the husband references death in one area, but he dies from something else. Okay, so that's an interesting issue. So Tana Rabbanan, this is your get if I die from this particular illness. The nafal habayas alav, and then the house falls on him. Or hikishu nakash, or a snake bites him. So ain't no get. It's not a valid get. Im lo amod mecholizeh. However, if the person says, if I don't get up from this illness, the nafal alav bias, hikishu nakash, hareze get. If I don't get better, so then it is a valid get. So Maishna ratio, Maishna Seifa. What's the difference between the ratio and the Seifa? Now, I will note that in the Yerushalmi, it says that the difference is the language. But here we don't accept that answer. The Gemara doesn't assume that answer, but rather Rashi explains that in fact the issue is that is that if it's an ones, meaning if this is so unlikely, what happened is so unlikely. So then, what is, sorry, I just realized I didn't write this down. What's the difference between these two cases? Meaning, if I'm going to ignore, right, in the second case, we basically ignore the fact that he died from another cause, because what is the intention of if I don't get better from this illness? The intention of that, if I don't get better from this illness, is that you die from the illness, and it's only if you die from the illness that you should give the get. So there is no difference. The Gemara, as we're understanding it, doesn't see a difference between if I don't get better from this illness and if I die from this illness. In both cases, that's the person's intention. So in the second situation, why is it a valid get? It's a valid get because it's so unlikely to get bitten by a snake or a house collapse. And so as a result, because it's so unlikely, we're going to ignore it and pretend it didn't happen. And so because that wasn't the kind of alternative condition that he was thinking about when he was trying to exclude other situations. And so as a result, it's going to be a valid get. But if it's a valid get in the second case, well, then it should also be a valid get in the first case. So the Gemara answers that, in fact, we're going to assume that there's some kind of problem here, and we need to fix it and figure out which is correct. Is the first answer correct? Is the first half of that brisa correct, or the second half? So Shilchamitam, they sent from over there in Israel, and Rashi explains that this was a situation where somebody had said, "Im lo amod micholizeh." So, like the second case in this brisa, if I don't recover from this illness, and then what happened? The achlu array, and a lion ate the person. Ein lanu. So we're going to say that that's not a valid get. So therefore, it's just like the first case. So in both situations, it's not a valid get, even though it was something that was very unusual. So again, where do we end up at this moment? We have a situation where even if something is unusual, we are going to assume that you had it in mind as in your thinking, that even though you said and your intention was if you die from this particular illness, and you might not have had any thought about a house collapsing or a snake biting you, and you may have even meant that you should get divorced, we're going to assume you had everything in mind, and we're not going to allow you to be divorced. So Hahu Gabra. So now we're going to have a situation where something happened. Hahu Gabra Dizamin Arab Gabra. So a certain person sold some land to his friend. And he said, I'm going to accept any kind of risk. Anything that bad happens to the land, if something bad happens to the land, I will pay you back for your loss. And in the end, as Rashi explains, the government came and effectively took away his land took away the land by sending a river over it. Made the Ravina. So the case came before Ravina. So I'm late. Zil Shapi late. Go pay up. The hakabiltach Allah kol unsu the misyalid. Just like we just saw, we're going to assume that anytime you're thinking about risks, we're thinking that you have every possible risk in mind. Here too, you thought about this risk and you accepted all risks. So as a result, you have to pay for it. So Amrle Rav Acha bar Tachlifa Ravina. So Rav Acha asked him, this is so uncommon. How could anybody have had in mind that they were accepting this kind of risk as well? So Igal Gel Milsa Umatala Kameda Rava. So as a result, the question still became a question, and it ended up coming to Rava. So Amr Lahu Unsa. So clearly it's an onus that is uncommon. And so as a result, the seller is not in fact going to be responsible in the diverted river case. So Ase Ravina Rava. So Ravina asked Rava, well, I don't understand. We have this brisa. Im lo amon mecholizeh, v'nafal alav bayis, oekishu nachash, hare zeh get. We say that it's a valid get, saying namely that you have everything in mind. So Amar le Rava, the Amam Resha. Well, 1 second, you have the Resha. Aino get, that it's not a valid get, meaning you don't have that you don't have everything in mind. And so as a result, shouldn't that be the case? So Amalei Rabba Acham Ravina, Umishum the Tasha Resha Asefa Lomos Vina and Tuyuktamina. 1 second. Just because you are showing a contradiction between the beginning of a brisa and the end of a brisa, why can't I ask you a question from it? So Amalei, and yeah, you can't ask a question from it because Kevin de Kasha Resha Seva. Once you have a difficulty between the beginning and the end, lo it marba midrasha. It must not have been discussed in the Beit Midrash. And it's inaccurate. So zil basar sfara. So we have to follow logic, and logic says that when somebody offers a condition, they are not intended to offer a condition for every possible situation. That if it's something out of the blue comes, what we refer to in the legal world as an act of God. So in that situation, then we're not going to have that condition treated as if it covers an act of God. So Rav Papa, Rav Huna, Breda, Rav Yoshua, Zavan, Shumshe, Agida, Dinar, Malka. So we had Rav Papa and Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yoshua. They bought some sesame seeds on the bank of the Malka River, and Agwar Malache La'abrinu, and they hired some sailors to take the sesame seeds. Kabilu Alayu Kolod to the Musyalid, and the sailors, the people who were going to take the transport, they agreed that they were going to take all kinds of risks. Any risk, we're going to get it. We're going to get it there. Like we're going to get it there, whatever it takes. So, but so it's the car. Is the car Nahar Malka? But in the end, the Nahar Malka got blocked up, so they couldn't actually take the river. The river transport wasn't moving. Amar Lahu. So Rav Papa and Ravuna said to them, "Listen, Aguro Chamre Avkein Hunialan. Go hire donkeys to bring us our stuff, our sesame seeds." Meaning, just because you said you were going to get it there no matter what, so you can't fly it. So take it on the train or take it on the donkey. You accepted yourself colons to mislid to mitlid that any kind of risk that might happen, any kind of accident that might happen. So also look made the Rabba, so it came in front of Rabba. Amar lahu, Rabba explained 1 second. Kake chivre, white geese. Rashi explains that this reference to white geese is actually indicating that these were wise and older gentlemen, Rav Papa and Rav Huna. Mishalke glime de inshe. You are taking the shirts off the people's back in unsa delosh because this is an onus that is not common. And so as a result, that's in fact the way we say, we don't, if you say, I'm going to take all the risk and something happens that couldn't possibly be considered a risk that you were intended to take, we're going to say that that was not intended. If I want to be protected from you in connection with that particular unforeseeable risk, I actually have to foresee it and write it down and say that in fact that's the risk that you're taking, and only then will you be on the hook for that risk. Okay, so now that this person has said that that they are going to have their get conditioned on death, what's the status of the woman right now? So that's our next Mishnah. Lotus Yachadimo, that she's not allowed to be alone with him. Elabifnei Edim, only with witnesses present. Afilu al pi eved, even with a servant, a slave, that's going to be sufficient as a witness. Afilu al pi shivcha, even if the slave is female. Chutz mishivchasa, but it won't cover her shivcha, her maidservant, because when they should leave a gaspa b'shivchasa, right? She's either here it says familiar, but it could also be that she has an air of superiority over her. It's not, she doesn't care what she does in front of her. She won't be embarrassed in front of her to do something like have marital relations. And so mahiba ota, all right. And so as a result, that's rule number 1. They can't be together. And the implication is because we're worried either that maybe they'll have marital relations and thereby get married and therefore need a second get, or that in fact it's just as if a single man and a single woman are together, and you can't have yichud, a single man and a single woman. That's just not appropriate. So mahi be'otan yamin, and what's her status? Rabbi Yehuda Omer, as we turn to Ayin Gimel and Bet, she's like a married woman for everything. Rabbi Yossi Omer, no, her status is uncertain. Her status is uncertain. So, okay, so let's take a look at the Gemara. And the Gemara is going to quote a brisa for which we're going to offer 3 different interpretations. And after offering those 3 different interpretations, we will be done for today and have caught up completely. So, Tana Rabbanan. So if a person observes that a divorcee and her ex-husband have gotten together in the dark, or she's sleeping with him underneath the bed, underneath a bed, and I think it means that this is like the bedpost. But yes, it also could be secretively. We're not going to suspect them of having actually had marital relations, but rather we will just assume that they had marital relations, promiscuous marital relations. Now that seems to contradict one another. That's exactly what the Gemara, why the Gemara is going to ask a question on this brisa to have an explanation, and that's why we're going to end up with 3 different explanations. And we do not suspect that they actually engage in marital relations for marriage. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, we even suspect that they engaged in cohabitation for the purpose of marriage. So, Micah Amar, what in the world is this brisa trying to say? Right? We have a couple of contradictory statements. We have number 1, it says we do not suspect them of having engaged in marital relations, but then we say we do suspect them of having been promiscuous, and we do not suspect them of having engaged in marital relations for marriage. There are 3 great straight statements, but they're not. It clearly can't all be the same case. So Rav Nachman says, offers the first answer. Rav Nachman, Amar Rabbi Baravua, Halchikamer. This is what he's trying to say. This is what the brisa is trying to say. Ra'ua shenivala. If the witnesses saw that they in fact had marital relations, choshishin mishum kiddushin, then we're worried that in fact they had an intention to get married. However, and so our first statement where it says that we do not suspect them of having engaged in marital relations, that's where we didn't see anything. And if we didn't see anything, so we won't suspect them. But if we actually saw them and do it, well, then we're going to assume that they did it for marital relations, to do it to get married. But Nasan Laksafim, if he gave her money, like a payment for a prostitute, well, then then we're assuming that it was not for marriage. That in fact he was just paying her wages. And we're not going to say that they got married. Even in that case, we'll be worried about them having gotten married. Now that we gave that explanation, it's important to note that there is a Mishnah on Daf Pei Aleph Amud Aleph, where a divorcee stayed at an inn with her ex-husband. And Beit Shammai rules that she does not need a get, while Beit Hillel rules that she does need a get. And Rabbi Bar Chana says in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that this is only true, meaning that their argument is only true where they were seen having relations. But if they were just alone, well, then it wouldn't trigger the need for a get according to either Beit Hillel or Beit Shammai. So now we're going to try to understand this interpretation that Rav Nachman offered for our Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi in this brisa. How does it correspond to Rabbi Bar Chana's understanding of that Mishnah? So, Kaman Azla Hada Amar Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So, like, who does Rabbi Bar Chana name Rabbi Yochanan follow? Machlokas Kisharua Nivala, right? The machlokas between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel is where they see them having marital relations. But if in get sheni, then there wouldn't be any need for a get sheni. Well, come on, it's actually like everybody, because both the Tanakama of our brisa and Rebbe Yossi would agree that if, in fact, they saw them having marital relations, they require a get. That's just like Beit Hillel. And if, in fact, they did not see them, then they do not require a get. And that is what everybody agrees in that other Mishnah, according to Rabbi Bar Chana. So everything is fine. So, but Maskiv lo Abaye asked on this 1 second, Midig Safim Katani? Rav Nachman introduced a topic that was not in this brisa. We didn't mention anything about money in this brisa. So how could you introduce that? So Ella Amar Abaye Hachkamer. This is what that brisa is really talking about. Again, if they didn't see them have marital relations, so then we're going to assume that they didn't have marital relations and they won't be married. But if they did have marital relations, we are worried that they were promiscuous. The Ein Choshishim Mishum Kedushin, but we're not worried about marriage. The Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, no, we even suspect them of having marriage. Now the issue is we'll see in a moment that word af doesn't make any sense, because that suggests that there's another case where we suspect them, but this is the only case that Rabbi Yossi suspects. So as a result, something else is wrong. So Kaman Azla Hada Amar Rabba Bar. Now again we ask the same question: who does Rabba Bar Chana when he modifies the Mishnah on Daf Pei Aleph? Who does he go like? Meaning, how do we align the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi in our brisa with the statement of Rabba Bar Chana? So, Kaman Azla Hada Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan Machlokas Kisha Ra'uha Shenivala Avalo Ra'uha Shenivala Divrei Hakol Ein Shricha Men Get Sheni. That everybody agrees that if they didn't see it, nobody would require a get. Well, come on, Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Yehuda. Well, it would only work like Rabbi Yossi. Why would it only work like Rabbi Yossi? Because of the following. Because what did the first opinion say? The first opinion in our Tanakama, in our brisa, said that if you saw them have marital relations, then we assume it was for promiscuity. But 1 second, Beit Hillel says in that Mishnah, as explained by Rabbi Bar Chana, that if you see them have marital relations, we assume it's for marriage and they have to get a second divorce. And so as a result, the Tanakama does not fit with Beis Hillel according to Rabbi Bar Chana. So as a result, only Rabbi Yossi would fit with Rabbi Bar Chana's statement. So Maskif Rabba. So and that's the case. That's the explanation number 2. So Maskif Rabba. Rabba asks a question on Abaye's interpretation. Im kain my af. What's the story with the word af? Meaning again, it doesn't make any sense. So Ella Amar Rabba Hachikamer. This is what the Bryce is really saying. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer. So we're just going to modify the last little bit of Rabbi Yossi. We're going to keep the first part according to Abaye, that that if in fact that the Tanakama believes that if you saw them cohabiting, then we're going to assume it's just znus, promiscuity, and not an intention for kedushin of marriage. But when it comes to Rabbi Yossi, we're going to say Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Av lo ra'ua shenivla choshishim mishum kedushin. No, what Rabbi Yossi is trying to say, that uses the word af, is that even if you didn't see them having marital relations, if you just saw them being alone together in the dark, in a situation where they could have marital relations, we're going to still suspect them of marriage. Well, the problem is come on, Asla Hada Amar Rabba Bar Chana Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Well, in that case, now how do the Tanakama and Rabbi Yossi in our brisa follow along with Rabba Bar Chana? Machlokas kesharua shenibula, avalo ra'ua shenibula divrei hakol ein etzricha himenu get. Come on, who does it go like? Delo kechad. It actually doesn't go like anybody. Because according to the Tanakama in our brisa, if you see them have marital relations, we say that it's only znus. But that disagrees with Beis Hillel on Daf Pei Aleph Amid Aleph, because on Pei Aleph Amid Aleph, Beis Hillel says that in the case of an inn where the two of them are together and you see them have marital relations, we assume that it is for marriage, and therefore she requires a new get. And so that doesn't work. Those are two disagreeing opinions. And similarly, Beis Hillel doesn't work with Rabbi Yossi, because what does Rabbi Yossi say in this brisa as explained by Rava? Rabbi Yossi says that even if we don't see her having marital relations, we only see them being alone together, we suspect them of having gotten married. And so therefore there would need to be a get. But according to Rabbi Bar Chana in the Mishnah on Pei Aleph Amid Aleph, if in fact they didn't see anything, if they only saw them getting together, but not that they actually had marital relations, Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that everyone agrees that you do not require a get, meaning it's not for marital relation, it's not for marriage. And so as a result, according to this interpretation of Rava, we don't have anyone agreeing with Rabbi Bar Chana and his understanding of the Mishnah. And so this helps us understand why we end up with the three different interpretations of our Mishnah, because really the first interpretation allows three different interpretations of the brisa. Because the first interpretation allows everybody to be consistent with Rabbi Bar Chana's statement and interpretation of the Mishnah on Pei Aleph. The second one at least allows Rabbi Yossi to be consistent, and the third one doesn't allow any consistency. But on the other hand, the third one is the most consistent with the language. The second is the next most consistent, and the first is the first least consistent with the language. So we have a progression of more consistency with the language, but we have a progression of less consistency with the statement of Rabbi Bar Chana. Okay, so that is this Gemara. Interesting discussion, how you can see how both you're trying to do two things. You want to try and fit your interpretation of something in with the language, but you also want to try and fit your interpretation in to be consistent with other opinions in the Gemara. And so that is always a struggle, and a struggle that we will continue to deal with, God willing, tomorrow as we pick up with the next stop. So tomorrow is Shabbos, so we wish everyone a good Shabbos, and I presume that will be 7 o'clock tonight. Yes, exactly. And looking forward, yes, next Friday will also be 7 o'clock. And I wish everyone a wonderful, wonderful Shabbos.